On overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Morning, Leith. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Phil.
Let's talk about energy costs, because none of us really understand it, I think.
We should talk about these energy costs that Australians have been burdened with over the past several years that just keep getting higher and higher and cost us more money.
And everybody wants to know how come they keep getting higher. I mean, what's the reason for all of these rises in energy costs?
Yeah, well, it certainly is interesting. So just to give a little bit of background, just before the last federal election, Labor released its 2021 Powering Australia plan. And that promised that Australians would save $275 in their residential electricity bills by 2025. So that's now.
Yeah.
And this was based on modelling that Labor got done. And this dodgy modelling under Labor's Powering Australia plan then formed the basis of Labor's 82% renewable energy target by 2030, which then became the basis of the CSIRO's Gen Cost Report and the Australian Energy Market Operators Integrated System Plan, which is basically driving Australia's energy policy. Now, instead of delivering lower energy prices and an 18% cut in energy prices as promised by Labor, the Australian Energy Market Operator reported that the average cost of producing electricity across the national electricity market, which is basically the East Coast energy market, was 72% higher than the level that Labor promised in 2021. So they've missed by a little bit there, Phil.
How did that happen? Did somebody just not do the calculations right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was always fantastical. It was never grounded in reality, but it actually gets worse than that, Phil. So last week, the Australian Energy Regulator, which basically sets the increases in electricity prices, announced that electricity bills are going to rise by up to 9% in New South Wales from 1 July and 6% in Queensland. So, as I said, the national energy market electricity costs in the fourth quarter of last year were 72% higher than promised by Labor, which promised that we get lower prices. And then from 1 July, we're going to get further increases in electricity prices. Now, Treasurer Jim Chalmers addressed the Queensland Media Club on Tuesday, where he was asked about Labor's promise before the last election to cut household bills by $275. And he admitted that it won't be met. Well, of course it won't, because it hasn't been met. And Chalmers blamed energy market volatility. He also claimed that prices would moderate once more renewables come online. Now, what Jim Chalmers should have said, if he was being serious about lowering Australian energy costs, is that his government would do two things. So first and foremost, one of the main drivers behind Australia's surge in electricity prices is that the east coast of Australia is the only gas exporting jurisdiction in the world that does not have a domestic reservation policy on gas. So give listeners some background here. East Coast Australia started exporting gas a decade ago. And we now export nearly 3/4 of our gas on the East Coast. Most of that goes to China. And in the last decade, the East Coast Australia has expanded its gas production by 100%. So it's doubled its production.
Right.
But we're supplying 25% less gas to the domestic market. So we're effectively, I call them the East Coast Gas Cartel. It's a handful of foreign-owned companies that are basically sucking up Australia's East Coast gas, putting it on ships, liquefying it, putting it on ships, sending it to China while they are starving the domestic market. And as a result, East Coast Australia has seen a tripling of the gas price in the last decade. So it's gone from about $4 a gigajoule up to about $12 a gigajoule. And that rise in gas prices is one of the main drivers behind the rise in electricity prices, because gas plays a key role in the electricity market because it's used for firming. So whenever there isn't enough renewables or wind or, we need excess power, we have to fire up a gas turbine, and then that sets the marginal price of gas. And because we've failed to reserve gas on the East Coast, and we're sucking it up and sending it to China, we're actually supplying less to the domestic market than we did 10 years ago, despite the fact that we've doubled production. What it's meant is that the gas price has soared, which has then meant that the electricity price has soared. Now, it's going to get worse, because from late this year, despite the fact that East Coast Australia exports nearly 3/4 of its own gas, we're going to start importing gas down in the south of starting in New South Wales and Port Kembla, and then Victoria and South Australia.
Right.
Because we've created this artificial shortage. And once we start importing gas, the East Coast gas price is going to rise from about $12 currently to about $20. To go from being an export parity price, which is basically the price that we sell to the rest of the world before you have to liquefy it and put it on a ship, to import parity price, which is basically that price plus the price of liquefying and then degassing it. Now, this is just absurd. So a decade ago, we were paying about $4 a gigajoule for gas, and it's currently 12, and then it's going to rise probably to $20 a gigajoule. And what this will mean is that not only will users of gas pay more money, it'll also then feed into electricity prices. And so if Jim Chalmers genuinely wants to lower power prices in Australia, we need a form of domestic reservation that is applied everywhere else in the world that sells gas, including Western Australia. And that would immediately bring down the price of gas domestically, and therefore it would lower electricity prices. And the other thing the government should do, Phil, is it should also abandon its hideously expensive renewables rollout.
Right.
Because Australia is rich in just about everything except for oil. We are the largest coal exporter in the world, which we sell to China. We are the second largest gas exporter in the world, which on the East Coast, we sell to China. And we're being told that we're not allowed to burn our own coal and gas to meet these net zero targets, while we send that same coal and gas to China, who burns it with impunity and is lifting its carbon emissions like you would not believe. So just to put this into perspective on coal, Australia exports around 6 times more coal than it burns. And we export that to China. So why not just burn more of our coal domestically and export less? Because the planet would be no worse off. It's going to get burnt either way. So Australia might as well burn it and give ourselves cheap power rather than sending that same coal to China so China can have cheap power.
So would it be fair to say then by us trying to be net zero, we're pretty much making a rod for our own back here?
Yeah, absolutely. So China is easily by far the world's largest coal producer. So it has more coal mines than anywhere else, and it produces more coal domestically. Right. It's the largest importer of coal, which it gets from us mostly. And it's also by far the largest user of coal. So China burns 30% more coal than the rest of the world combined. And every year it adds more coal mines, it adds more coal-fired generation, etc. At the same time as Australia and other Western countries are trying to be net zero heroes and cutting back on their use of coal and gas and other things. And all that's happening is that Australia accounts for 1% of the world's carbon emissions, whereas China accounts for nearly a third of the world's carbon emissions. And China's emissions are rising at a near exponential rate. They're going up almost in a straight line, whereas Australians have actually fallen in the last decade. Now, just to put that into perspective, since Australia's emissions peaked in 2008, China has added 94 times as much emissions compared to what Australia has saved. So what are we doing here? So we are literally trying to save the world, being 1% of the world's carbon emissions, giving ourselves expensive energy while we send that same energy across to China, who's burning it anyway. And as a result, we're pushing up our power prices and we are deindustrializing because our manufacturing is shutting down. We've got the smallest manufacturing share in the advanced world as a share of our economy. It's only about 5% of our economy, which is the lowest in the OECD. And we are losing manufacturers hand over fist. So just to put some of that into perspective, in 2022, Incitec pivot, downsized significantly its fertiliser business. So it closed its Gibson fertiliser plant in Queensland. It also shut its fertiliser plant in Victoria last year because of high energy prices, right? So I've lost one of the makers of fertilisers. Last year, we lost Australia's last plastics manufacturer, Queenos, because of high energy prices. Last month, we lost Australia's last architectural glass maker, which made the windows for Parliament House, Oceania Glass, due to a large extent because of high energy prices. So if we keep doing this, and we keep saying, oh, no, we're not allowed to burn coal or gas because, net zero, while we send that same coal and gas to China, all we're going to end up doing is that the coal and gas is still going to be burnt. It's just going to be sent to China to burn, and then we're going to send our manufacturing across to China because it becomes too expensive to produce anything here anymore. And net, the world is no better off. And the thing about it is, building out intermittent and unreliable renewables, and I say they're intermittent and unreliable because they only work when the sun shines, the wind blows, and you can't control the weather, versus something that you can actually control is ridiculous. And it's going to cost Australia about $500 billion to build out the entire renewables network. That $500 billion is going to be capitalised into our power bills, or we're going to pay for it through our taxes. And I'd argue that it's a lot better and be a lot smarter if we just simply burn what we already have.
Yeah, we've got
it here in abundance. We are the biggest coal exporter in the world, and we're the second biggest gas exporter. So why not give that stuff to ourselves really cheaply instead of selling it to China on the cheap.
Yeah.
Burn it ourselves and actually give ourselves cheap power and reliable power. And then we might actually have a manufacturing industry because electricity and gas would be cheap, and we'd have a more diversified economy. And recent modelling by Moody's that was released a few months ago, that's one of the world's largest credit rating agencies. They did some modelling that said that Australia's retail cost of energy is going to rise by 20 to 35% in real terms. That's adjusting for inflation over the next decade, purely based on the rollout of renewables. Because we're going to spend so much money on transmission that those are going to get capitalised into our bills. Down in Victoria, Infrastructure Victoria's 30-year infrastructure strategy that was released earlier this month, and that projected that the wholesale electricity price is going to double because of the rollout of renewables as we shut down coal-fired generation. So is this really that smart? There's no point in Australia playing the hero in net zero while it exports many times more coal and gas to China to burn instead. And the failure to reserve our gas and this mad drive to shut down our coal-fired generation, which we've got oodles of, to try and plunge us into this 82% renewable energy target, which is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars to build, is just going to drive up power costs, it's going to drive up inflation, it's going to push up our cost of living, and it's going to further deindustrialise our economy because our manufacturing sector is going to keep shrinking because it'll become unaffordable to manufacture here. So Australia should just use what it has in abundance, that's coal and gas, and give ourselves cheap energy, Phil. That's my view.
Which is the bottom line, which is why we call this segment the Treasury of Common Sense. Where can people go if they want to find out more information, buddy?
Our listeners can go to macrobusiness.com.au, and I write about these sorts of issues every day.